Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we have a new video. What if Luffy ate the lightning devil fruit? Part 1. Before we get started, please hit that like and subscribe button. Disclaimer: One Piece is owned by Eiichiro Oda. I do not own anything One Piece related. Obviously. Let's get started. Chapter 1, Romance Dawn. In the party bar in Fusha village, a group of pirates could be seen drinking and having a good time. Sitting at the bar is a young 7-year-old boy named Monkey D. Luffy, and next to him is a red-haired man with a straw hat eating a plate of food. "Hey, you have to take me with you on your next adventure, Shanks. I want to be a pirate just like you," Luffy said with a huge smile on his face while looking at the red-haired man now named Shanks. Shanks looked up from his food and turned towards Luffy and started laughing. "Ha ha ha ha. Right, as if you could ever be a pirate," Shanks said. "Why couldn't I?" Luffy asked. A large man eating a piece of meat answered his question. "Listen, Luffy, you may be a good swimmer and all, but that doesn't mean you will make a good pirate," said Lucky Roo while eating his meat. "But I'm a great fighter too. My punches are like 2 pistols, he said as he held out his fist for them to see. It was an amusing sight to see for everyone else in the bar. "Are they now?" said Shanks with a mouth full of food. "What's that supposed to mean?" Luffy yelled. Lucky Roo laughed and spoke. "He means you are too much of a kid, he said." "And he is right, you know. I got boys older than you," said Yasopp. A tick mark formed on Luffy's forehead before he starting to yell at them. "I'm not a kid. I'm a grown-up," he screamed at the top of the lungs. He was brought out of his screaming by Shanks' voice. "Here, have some juice and clam down," Shanks said as she slid a glass of what appears to be orange juice over to Luffy. Luffy's eyes lit up and he got a huge smile on his face. "Wow, thanks, Shanks," he said as he began to drink the juice. As he started drinking, Shanks started laughing at him while hitting the bar counter. "I don't know one pirate who drinks juice," Shanks said while laughing. "That's a dirty trick," Luffy screamed, causing everyone at the bar to burst out laughing. "Stop laughing. That was a cheap shot," he screamed at the rest of the pirates. While all of this is going on, the owner of the bar, Makino, is watching the interaction between Luffy and the pirates with a warm smile on her face. Suddenly the doors of the bar were kicked off of its hinges and came flying into the bar. "Excuse us," said the tall man standing in front of the door. At this point, the entire bar was silent while looking at the door. The man who was leading the group of other men into the bar was a tall, dark-skinned man with black hair, a black goatee, and an X-shaped scar above his right eye. He wore a long red coat over a white shirt, black trousers, and a golden necklace. "So these are what passes for pirates around these parts. Looks rather sad, to be honest," he said as he walked up to the bar counter and stood next to Shanks. "Welcome, gentlemen, what can I do for you?" asked Makino. "We're mountain bandits, but we didn't come here to tear your place apart. All we want is some sake. Let's say 10 barrels should do," he said to Makino. "I'm sorry, but actually we are fresh out of sake right now," Makino said. After the mountain bandit had said he didn't come to terrorize the bar, Luffy and tuned out and turned his attention elsewhere because in his opinion a mountain bandit ordering sake was boring. So, he turned to his right at the chest sitting on the counter of the bar. He knew it belonged to Shanks because he saw when they brought it in with them. His mind immediately began to race with ideas after ideas about what may be inside of the chest. So, he decided to satisfy his curiosity and look inside. It was somewhat disappointing because inside of the chest wasn't any treasure like Luffy had hoped it would be. Instead, it was a strange-looking fruit. It was a light blue fruit shaped like a really big pear with darker blue swirls on it. At that very same time, Luffy's stomach growled, so he decided to eat the fruit. Luffy being Luffy, instead of taking a small bit of the fruit to see what it takes, like he places the entire thing in his mouth and bit down. He instantly regretted it. That was the most disgusting thing Luffy had ever eaten. However, he did not spit it out, instead he swallowed. At the same time, he was startled when something large fell beside him. He looked over to see Shanks laying on the ground while the mountain bandit was screaming some nonsense about being worth 8 million belly. Luffy immediately jumped up on the bar stool that he was sitting on and screamed at the bandits. "Leave Shanks alone," he screamed at the bandit while unconsciously releasing a wave of unknown power. When Luffy did this, the strangest thing happened. One by one the mountain bandits started passing out along with a few weaker members of Shanks' crew. Shanks and the rest of the crew that were awake had their eyes widened while the leader of the mountain bandits was shaking in his boots. What did you do, brat?" he yelled/asked Luffy. Luffy for his part looked shocked and confused about what had just happened. There is no doubt about it. That was the Conqueror's spirit. Shanks' first mate Ben Beckman thought to himself before making eye contact with his captain, who nodded to him. Before anyone could have reacted, the mountain bandit leader took out his sword and swung it to chop Luffy in half while screaming at the top of his voice. "I am going to kill you, brat," he yelled as the sword began to descend towards Luffy. Shanks, who was still on the ground, couldn't react fast enough even though he tried, but stopped halfway because of what happened next. The sword cut through Luffy's shoulder and made its way to his chest, but stopped there when sparks of lightning came from Luffy's body and electrocuted the bandit. The sword fell out of Luffy's chest and the bandit began to fall to the ground as well. Everyone in the bar started at Luffy as the huge cut from his shoulder to his chest began to come together again with the sight of lighting present in the gap. No one said a word, they all stared at the small 7-year-old boy. Everyone was brought out of their staring by Shanks' voice. "Luffy, did you eat the fruit that was inside of the chest?" he asked, to which Luffy nodded. Shanks then tried to grab Luffy by the shoulder only to have his hand pass right through Luffy and get a serious electric shock at the same time. Shanks immediately pulled his hand back. He then looked at Luffy before he spoke. "Luffy, you just ate the Rumble fruit, part of a group called the Devil Fruits. Eating any of them takes away your ability to swim for the rest of your life, but the one you ate is a Logia-class Devil Fruit, meaning now you can turn your body into lightning and become lightning," Shanks yelled. Luffy for his part had stars in his eyes at the idea of becoming lightning. "Does this mean I can come with you now?" asked a very hopeful Luffy. Shanks went to take his seat at the bar again before he was joined by his first mate, who signaled Makino to join them before they began whispering so Luffy couldn't hear. "Captain, he just ate a Logia-class Devil Fruit and one of the more powerful ones at that," said Ben Beckman, "plus Conqueror's Haki. If he doesn't learn how to control his powers he could seriously hurt someone," he finished while Shanks took on a serious look and Makino a more worried one. "Is he going to be alright?" as a worried Makino. Shanks looked at her and smiled before speaking. "Yeah, he will, don't worry." The three of them were brought out of their whispering when Luffy screamed at them. "Hey! Stop whispering, I can't hear what you are saying," Luffy yelled, causing them to break apart. He then turned to Shanks before speaking again. "So, can I come with you guys, Shanks?" he asked again, making Shanks turn to look at him before speaking. "I will decide if I will take after you answer 2 questions. "Okay," said Shanks, to which Luffy nodded. "The first question, do you know what you did to knock out those bandits?" Shanks asked, causing everyone in the bar to quiet down to hear Luffy's answer. "No, I don't know how I did it. It usually just happens when Grandpa is training me," said Luffy, to which Shanks nodded with his eyes closed before his eyes shot open in surprise. "You mean you used it before?" he asked in surprise. Luffy just nodded. "Yeah, against some monkeys Grandpa had me fight during my training," said casually as though it was noting, while everyone else looked at him wide-eyed except for Makino. "Who has a 7-year-old fight monkey as a part of training?" every pirate thought to themselves. Shanks then turned towards Makino and asked her a question. "Who is Luffy's grandpa?" Shanks asked, to which Makino took on a sinister look before she spoke. "Monkey D. Garp," she said, causing the entire bar to freeze and looked at her with their eyes widen. You mean Garp, the Fist, is his grandfather? Shanks yelled out to causing Makino to giggle before nodding. Shanks began to calm himself down before turning back towards Luffy, who was picking his nose, causing everyone to sweat drop. Okay, Luffy, second question. Shanks said, getting Luffy's attention. What's your dream? Shanks asked, to which Luffy took on a huge smile before he stood up on the stool and yelled out at the top of his lungs. My dream is to be king of pirates, he yelled. And why king of the pirates? Shanks asked. Because the king of the pirates is the man with the most freedom, said Luffy, surprising everyone. Just you wait, I am going to have the greatest adventure and find the One Piece and become king of the pirates. Luffy said with a lot of determination in his voice, causing everyone to smile and Shanks to see an image of his old captain Gold Roger behind Luffy. Well, Luffy, Shanks said, getting Luffy's attention. Welcome to the crew, he said, causing everyone to begin cheering and Luffy to start crying. A week had passed since Shanks agreed to take Luffy with them. Currently, the entire village was at the docks to say goodbye to Luffy and the pirates. At first, the mayor did not agree to Luffy leaving, but after Ben and Shanks explained to him how dangerous it will if Luffy doesn't learn how to control his powers, he understood and agreed, but made it clear that Makino would be the one to tell Garp when he comes back to the village. Another thing that happened during the week was that Shanks had sent one of his crew member who didn't have a bounty on his head to cash in the bounty of the mountain bandits and give it to Luffy. Luffy, who was currently on Shanks's ship Red Force, waving goodbye to the villagers before he screamed out. By Makino. I'll come back before I set out on my own, he yells as the ship sailed further away from the island. With the island now out of sight, Shanks began giving orders to the crew. Okay guys, no stop, we have enough supplies to last us, so set a course for the Grand Line, he said. Aye, Captain, replied everyone. Shanks then turned towards Luffy, who was looking around with a huge smile on his face, causing Shanks to chuckle. Luffy, yelled Shanks, getting Luffy's attention. Come with me, he said as he began walking towards what appears to be the sleeping quarters. This is where you will sleep, Shanks said, indicating to the room with a single bed, desk, and closet inside. It wasn't a big room, but at the same time, it was big enough for one adult person. Luffy looked around and noticed his stuff was already in there waiting for him. He stepped inside and smiled. I love it, he said, causing Shanks to smile. Okay, Luffy, let me tell you how things are going to happen once we enter the Grand Line, Shanks said, getting Luffy's attention. Luffy also noticed that Ben, Roo, and Yasopp were standing by the doorway. First thing that will happen is Lucy Roo is going to teach you how to control that devil fruit of yours a bit. Then from there, every day in the morning, Ben is going to teach you navigation and history along with battle strategy and anything else he comes up with. That will be for about 3 hours a day every day. The rest of the day is either spent with me teaching you hockey or Yasopp teaching you how to shoot. Whatever extra time you have, you will train to master your devil fruit powers, or you can do that after you either master hockey or sharp shooting. Understood? Asked Shanks, to which Luffy nodded and spoke. Yep, now I have one question, he said, to which Shanks nodded for him to proceed. Do you have any meat? He said, causing the four of them to comically fall over. After Shanks had explained everything to Luffy again to make sure he understood, he began to explain to Luffy what hockey was and how it may be useful in combat. To say that Luffy liked the idea was an understatement. Luffy kept begging Shanks over and over to start his training until Shanks finally caved and started teaching him observation hockey. It had been 3 days since the crew left Dawn Island and the entrance to the Grand Line was in sight. Luffy was excited at the thought of sailing up a mountain. As the ship began ascending the mountain and peak was becoming visible, Luffy dashed to the front of the ship and began climbing to stand on the figurehead. Everyone saw this and began to get scared when Luffy finally stood on the figurehead. As the ship reached the peak and began descending into the Grand Line, Luffy stretched out his arms and screamed to the heavens. I am going to be the king of the pirates, he screamed, causing everyone on board to smile at the determination in the young 7-year-old. Chapter 2, Farewells and Kobe. Time skip. 10 years later on an island in the New World. On a small island in the New World, a pirate ship could be seen docked close to the island. On the shores of the island, a large group of people could be seen standing with their backs towards the sea while looking at a man standing in front of them. This man was the now 17-year-old monkey D. Luffy. Luffy was now 6 feet 5 inches and well built. He was wearing long black pants with a pair of steel-tipped boots and a crimson-red dress shirt with the top 3 buttons opened, revealing a necklace with a lightning bolt pendant. Strapped with a black cloth around his waist was a katana with a black and white diamond pattern handle hanging off the left side of his hip. And to top everything off was the thing he treasures more than his own life resting on his head, the straw hat that Shanks gave to him. Everyone from the red-haired pirates was gathered on the shore today to see Luffy off to start his own adventure. I want to thank you guys for all you have done for me over the past 10 years, and I am truly grateful for all you have taught me, said Luffy while looking at everyone. Ah, don't sweat it, Luffy, said Lucky Roo, who was walking over to Luffy carrying 2 large barrels on his shoulder while somehow able to hold a piece of meat in his hands as well. Here, got you something for the trip, he said as he placed the barrels down. There should be enough meat and booze in there to last you the trip to the East Blue, he finished. Luffy smiled at him and thanked him for the food. As Lucky Roo was walking back to stand with the rest of the crew, Yasopp began walking towards Luffy. Hey Lou, I got a bit of a going-away present here for you, Yasopp said as he pulled out a medium box from his coat and handed it to Luffy. Luffy took it and looked at the nice wrapping around the box before he spoke. Yasopp, you really didn't have to do this. You guys have done way more for me than anyone ever had, Luffy said. Nonsense, kid, we're a family and you can never do too much for your family, Yasopp said while patting Luffy on the back. Luffy smiled and opened the box to see a black and red flintlock pistol. It is Doflamingo's gun, only black and red instead of black and gold. Luffy held the gun in his hand and looked in the box to see the holster. He strapped the holster around the waist so the gun would be on his right side. Luffy then took on a puzzled look on his face. He had a gun and a holster, but no ammo. He looked over to Yasopp and spoke. I don't see any ammo in the box and there is none loaded into the gun. Am I going to have to buy some? Luffy asked, genuinely confused. He looked around to see everyone else confused just as he was. He then looked at Yasopp to see him with a wide smile on his face. No, you don't have to buy ammo for this gun. Never will, he said, adding to the confusion of Luffy and everyone else there, this is a special gun made especially for you. I always wanted one, but even if I bought one for myself I won't be able to use it. You see, this gun is powered by your devil fruit and in your case, it will not fire regular bullets but instead, it will fire your lightning as bullets. Yasopp said, surprising everyone there and causing Luffy's eyes to widen. I never knew they made weapons like this, Luffy said as he looked at the gun in his hand. He was brought out of his admiring by Yasopp's voice. Before you can use it you need it to register your devil fruit. So, channel some of your lightning into the gun, he said. Luffy held out the gun and began channeling his lightning powers into the gun and soon the entire gun was covered with lighting. He then looked to Yasopp who nodded to him to stop what he did only to see the excess lightning get absorbed into the gun. There, that should do it. Try shooting this, he said as he pulled out an empty sake bottle and tossed it into the air. Luffy held the gun in his right hand, aimed it at the bottle, and pulled the trigger. Out of the gun came a bolt of lighting that moved faster than anyone other than Luffy could see, racing towards the empty bottle in the air. Upon impact, the bolt of lightning didn't just shatter the bottle and continue on its path as everyone expected. It hit the bottle and exploded. Everyone was stunned at what they just witnessed. Luffy, wanting to test something out, he aimed the gun at a nearby tree, compressed his lightning, and then he pulled the trigger. Like before, a bolt of lightning raced out of the gun towards the tree. However, this time it pierced through the tree before doing the same to 5 more trees behind it before it finally exploded, destroying the last tree in the process. "What did you do differently there, Luffy, to make it pierce through all those trees?" asked Shanks. Luffy placed the pistol in the holster and turned towards Shanks before speaking. "I simply compressed the lightning a bit more this time, but I didn't expect it to do that much damage," he said before turning towards Yasopp and continue. "Thanks, Yasopp, I love it," Luffy said with a huge grin on his face. Yasopp smiled at him and patted him on the back before leaving to go stand with the rest of the crew. While he was walking back, Shanks started walking towards Luffy with a parcel in his hands. He didn't say anything, he just handed it to Luffy and stood there. Luffy looked at it with a smile on his face before he opened the wrapping to see a coat folded inside. He took the coat out to examine it to see that it was a black and gold captain's coat. Think Gold Roger's coat, only black instead of red. Luffy then took the coat and placed it on. He wore it the way he saw every other captain of a pirate crew wearing theirs, just resting on his shoulders. Luffy looked at Shanks and spoke. "Thanks, Shanks, I love it. It fits perfect," he said with a smile. Shanks smiled at him and replied, "It's nothing, Anchor. If you are going to be captain of your own crew, might as well look the part," Shanks said with a chuckle. "Again, thank you guys for everything. Without you guys, I don't know where I would be, or if I would have learned the things I learned with you guys over the past 10 years. Luffy said as he looked at everyone, a bit teary eyes. He then wiped his eyes and took on a more serious look on his face as he looked to the sky and began concentrating. In the sky above, everyone could see a thundercloud starting to form. It then started to increase in size, getting bigger and bigger until everyone realized something. It wasn't getting bigger, it was getting closer to them. Everyone was wondering what in the world was Luffy doing. The cloud finally came down and hovered just about a half of a foot above the ground. It was a dark thundercloud about the size of a small 6-person boat. Luffy then walked over to the 2 barrels he got from Lucky Root, picked them up and placed them on the cloud. They sank down a few inches before staying in place. Everyone's eyes were wide. "That's your ride," they all screamed. Luffy looked at them and gave them a wide grin. "You betcha," he said with giving them a thumbs up. He then placed the rest of his stuff on the cloud. He then began concentrating on the cloud once more, and from the cloud, a lounge chair began to form. Luffy then climbs onto the cloud and sat on the chair before turning towards the group to speak. "I should re-enter the Grand Line by the end of the month. When I see you guys again, I'll be a famous pirate," said Luffy, smiling. Everyone gave him a warm smile. "I'll be looking out for you, Anchor," said Shanks. "We all will," said Ben. Luffy then waved at them and began speaking. "Bye guys. Thanks for everything again," he said. As he said that, the clower he was riding on began ascending into the air before it shot forward and began climbing to higher altitude. Everyone just stared at the flying Luffy and waved. "I'm going to miss that kid," said Yasopp. Everyone just nodded their heads in agreement. Luffy, who was laying in his lounge chair made out of clouds, was just relaxing and enjoying the scenery of the world below him. He was traveling at about 65 miles per hour and was about 20,000 feet in the air. At first, it was a bit hard to breathe, but after a couple of minutes, Luffy got used to the thin oxygen that was present that high up. On his journey, Luffy could see various small sky islands with people on them. Some waved at him he waved back, while others were wary of him, so they ran into their homes and hid. Luffy didn't really care, all he did was continue on his journey to the East Blue. It would take him about 1 day to reach the East Blue, or less than a day if he decides he wants to go faster. For now, Luffy is just enjoying the relaxing ride. "So, this is the Holy Land Mariewa," Luffy said as he stopped the cloud and have it hover high over the capital of the world government, where no one will be able to see him. He had been traveling for about 6 hours now and finally reached the Red Line. Seeing as how he can fly with the cloud, he didn't need to go down to Fishman Island, he could just fly over the Red Line. Luffy couldn't help but admire the city. Even though he didn't like the bastards in the world government, he couldn't deny it was a beautiful city with amazing architecture. "Well, I am not here to admire the sights, I have places to be," Luffy said as he narrowed his eyes forward and concentrated on the lightning in the thundercloud before blasting off a lot faster than which he was moving at first. Luffy now entered paradise traveling at a speed of 100 miles per hour. He had taken off his straw hat because he didn't want it getting blown away. At this speed, Luffy is estimated to arrive in the East Blue in about 3 hours. Time skip, 3 hours later. Luffy is now in the East Blue after being gone for 10 years. He immediately slowed the cloud down to only about 40 miles per hour and lowered the altitude to just about enough so he could see the world below him quite clearly. Feels good to be back home. First stop Makino Nichin, then off to find a crew, Luffy said as he began traveling towards Dawn Island. After traveling for about an hour, Luffy finally arrived at a familiar island where he flew his cloud onto the docks before stepping off. As Luffy stepped off, he turned to the cloud and it began to hover higher and higher until it finally disappears into the other clouds present in the sky. Luffy then turned around to see that he had attracted a crowd. The man standing in front of the crowd was someone Luffy remembered quite vividly. He was Mayor Whoop Slap. He has a cleft chin, wears oval glasses, has a mustache and a beard, and held a cane on his hand. Luffy smiled at the man and began walking towards the crowd. "Who are you?" "Are you a pirate?" asked the mayor while pointing his cane at Luffy. Luffy took on an amused look on his face before he answered. "Yes, I am a pirate," Luffy said, doing very little to hide his amusement. "However, you can relax, Mayor, I mean you no harm, I am just here to see my older sister," Luffy said, confusing everyone there who was wondering who was his sister. Before they could have questioned him, Luffy began walking towards Makino's bar, knowing full well he had a crowd following him. As he reached the bar, he walked inside and sat in the same seat he sat in 10 years ago when Shanks was there. Makino was not by the bar, so he assumed she was in the back. He was a few minutes before she finally came out. When she saw a young man sitting at the counter, she went to him and spoke. "Good afternoon, sir, is there anything I can help you with?" Makino said. Luffy gave her his famous grin before answering. "Yes, a large tub of meat and some sake, Makino Nichin," Luffy said while grinning. As he said he heard gasps from behind him and one from Makino, as well as he covered her mouth with her hand and started tearing up before she launched herself over the counter, surprising Luffy and the crowd that followed him. As she launched herself, she screamed at the top of her voice. "Luffy!" she screamed as she crashed into Luffy, knocking him off the stool before hugging him and crying into his chest. "Luffy, you came back like you said." "I missed you," she said as she sniffled a bit. She finally got off of him and helped him up before she ran into the back and came back out with a large tub of meat and a bottle of sake. She set it down in front of where he sat at the counter before she went around the counter and sat next to him before speaking. "Tell me, how was your trip with Shanks? Where did you go? What did you see? Tell me everything," Makino said excitedly. Luffy chuckled at her antics and was about to answer, but before he could, the entire crowd that followed him into the bar screamed out, "Luffy's back!" They screamed as they all pulled out mugs of booze from what appears out of nowhere and began sitting around the bar to hear Luffy's stories. Luffy chuckled and began telling them stories of his time with Shanks. Luffy stayed in Fusha village for 3 days before he decided to set out to find a crew. Currently, Luffy was standing at the same docks where he arrived at, with the entire village standing there to see him off. Luffy was currently looking up into the sky, calling the thundercloud that had all of his stuff. Soon out of the clouds everyone saw a single thundercloud come out and began descending towards Luffy. The cloud then pulled up beside the dock as if it were a ship docking there, and Luffy stepped on it. Luffy then turned towards the group of villagers and spoke. "Bye guys, I will see you guys when I am king of the pirates," Luffy said as he waved with a huge smile on his as the cloud began to pull away. "Be safe, Luffy. I'll be checking the newspaper every day to see what you've been up to," Makino shouted as Luffy was pulling away. Luffy gave her a thumbs up before dashing away. He kept the clout just 10 feet above the water and had it sailed at a slow speed of 25 miles per hour. While sailing, a Sea King rose from the water and tried to attack Luffy, but Luffy simply sent a blast of Conqueror's Haki and knocked the beat out before continuing his way. Luffy now shifted his chair into a throne with lightning sparks occasionally coming off of it, and his face took on a more serious, impassive look. Gone was the happy-go-lucky Luffy. This was Captain Luffy. Luffy then spoke in a tone that would send chills down his enemy's spine. "Time to turn this world upside down," he said. After traveling for about 10 minutes, Luffy was startled by the sounds of cannon fire coming from the starboard side of the cloud. He looked to see who was shooting at what, and that's when he saw the ugliest pirate ship he had ever seen in his life. The ship was a large pink ship, with 4 sails, one higher than the other 3. Each sail has a pink heart, and the ship herself has 2 hearts on each side. The figurehead is a duck, and the Jolly Roger of a skull is depicted from the side and has a pink heart on it. The ship was currently attacking a civilian vessel. "I wonder if anyone there has a bounty on their heads," Luffy wondered as he turned the cloud and head towards the pirate ship. As the cloud pulled up beside the pink ship, Luffy had it stay hidden just off the side before he stood up and turned his body into lightning before teleporting to the deck of the ship. All the pirates and civilians saw was lightning struck the ship while a loud thunder sounded in the clear blue sky, and now standing in the spot where the lightning had struck is a man with a captain's coat hung on his shoulders and a straw hat on his head. Everything about the man radiated power. His gaze, if cold enough to freeze the sun, and his aura was strong enough to make seasoned fighters cower in fear. No one said a word, they all just stared at the man in fear. The silence lasted about 2 minutes before what appears to be a fat, ugly woman spoke. "Who are you and why are you on my ship?" she screamed at the man, trying to act bravely in front of her men on the outside while in the inside she was shaking her boots. "I was simply wondering who is the captain of this hideous vessel," he said as he looked around while using his observation haki to sense around the ship. He sensed a girl in the lower levels robbing these pirates. He couldn't help but chuckle. He was brought out his observing when the fat lady spoke. "Are you the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro?" she asked, which earned her a raised eyebrow from Luffy before he replied. "No, can't say that I am." "Who might you be?" Luffy asked, genuinely curious about who she was and whether or not she had a bounty. "I am the most beautiful woman of all the seas," she said as she placed her iron club on her shoulders before continuing, "the one and only Iron Club Alvida," she said. When she said that, Luffy couldn't help but burst out laughing. "You? The most beautiful woman of all the seas?" Luffy said as he started rolling on the floor laughing. "Sorry, hag, but you ain't nowhere close to being the most beautiful woman of all the seas," Luffy said as he stood up and looked at the woman to see her fuming, but that meant very little to Luffy as he began speaking again. "Do you by chance have a bounty on your head?" Luffy asked. He saw the woman smirk before answering. "Yes, I have a bounty of 5 million berry on my head," she said as Luffy simply sighed. "Damn, was hoping it was a bit more. Anyway, time for business," Luffy said as he sent a wave of Conqueror's Haki towards the pirates, effectively knocking out all of them except Alvida and surprisingly a short pink-haired boy who only fell to a knee. Luffy turned to the boy and spoke. "You have a strong will to be able to withstand my Haki like that, kid," Luffy said with a smile that made the boy smile as well. Alvida turned to the boy and was about to speak, but never got a chance to, because she was hit square of the jaw by Luffy with a fist coated in lightning, effectively knocking her out. Luffy then placed his palm on her back and spoke. "Bind," he said, and then all of a sudden from the palm of his hand 3 rope-like bolts of lightning came out and snaked itself around Alvida, binding her in place. The boy with the pink hair had his eyes popping out of its socket. "How did you do that?" he asked/screamed. Luffy smiled and answered. "I ate a devil fruit, the rumble fruit to be exact. So, now I am a lightning man," Luffy said as he turned his entire right hand into lightning, by the way, what's your name? Luffy asked. Oh, I'm Kobe, sir, Kobe said as Luffy turned his hand back to normal. Nice to meet you, Kobe, my name is Monkey D. Luffy. And I am going to be king of the pirates. That's it for this part, hope you guys enjoyed it. Before you guys leave, please hit that like and subscribe button.